Hi, welcome back. This is a follow-up to the video on pop science. So if you haven't seen that, go watch that right now. I just want to discuss a few ideas, a few things that got left out of the video. The first of which is Josh Kaufman. Now, Josh wrote a follow-up to Malcolm Gladwell's piece, Outliers, and his 10,000 hour rule. The 10,000 hour rule, if you don't know, is the idea that to be an expert in any given field, it takes roughly 10,000 hours of practice. This has been sociological research that's been done. And it's basically built on some actual data. But Josh Kaufman decided that he was going to make his own rule, and he called it the 20-hour rule, which he says will get you good at anything. Here's what his idea basically says.
If you put 20 hours of focused, deliberate practice into that thing, you will be astounded at how good you are.
Now, like Gladwell, Josh Kaufman says his discovery is backed by research.
How long does it take from starting something and being grossly incompetent and knowing it to being reasonably good? How long does that take? Here's what my research says. 20 hours. Now,
what is that research? Well, besides a few charts that he puts up about it, about the bell curve of learning, if you go to his book, if you buy his book like I did for like $15, you find out that it's all based on his personal experience. As in, he literally, the book, if I can spoil it for you, spoiler warning, is just him learning 6 different skills, deciding that the average of those skills to get good enough, however good he wanted to be, was 20 hours, and then he just called it the 20-hour rule. Got a TED Talk. Got a TED Talk from like becoming bad at the ukulele, kiteboarding, chess, yoga, a bunch of random skills. And he just translates this and says like, oh yeah, this is the new rule. It's not a rule. It's not a rule. It's just his personal, it's like his personal motto, you could almost call it. No one in that audience realizes that this is not a scientific backed claim or anything like that. It's just his opinion. It's actually unbelievable that got however many views on YouTube. It's like in the millions. Millions of people saw that and thought to themselves there's something called the 20-hour rule that can teach you to, in Josh's words, learn to juggle flaming chainsaws as long as you give 20 hours to something.
Want to learn a language? Want to learn how to draw? Want to learn how to juggle flaming chainsaws?
So just absurd. And it just goes to show, as long as you just say it's backed by research, it doesn't actually have to be. It can be backed by personal experience. As long as you just say it, it passes. The next idea I want to talk about is Adam Grant. We're back to him and his study of web browsers. So in his book and in his TED Talk, it's the second point of his book, he says that web browsers, what web browser you use, can actually determine how good of a worker you are.
We can predict your job performance and your commitment just by knowing what web browser you use. There is good evidence that Firefox and Chrome users significantly outperform Internet Explorer and Safari users. They also stay in their jobs 15% longer, by the way.
Now, this is obviously a super interesting claim, but where is the data behind this, right? Like, proving causality in sociology and in big data is really hard. So, how did he do this? Well, I went to Adam Grant and I said, where's this data that you did? Where's the methodology? He told me, well, I don't have it. Go to the original guy who made it, right? And his book says this too. It was done by this guy, Michael Hausman. So, okay, I go to Michael Hausman. So I contact Michael Hausman. I say, hey, where's this data you did? He said, oh, well, I don't have it. You have to go ask my former employer where I did the work. It's probably become a white paper there. So I go to Cornerstone On Demand and I asked them, hey, where's this paper that Michael Hausman did? He used to work for you. And they said, oh, we have no idea what you're talking about. We don't know where this white paper is either. So they don't know. So I go back to Grant and I say, hey, the second argument in your book, nobody knows where the paper is. No one knows where the data is. He says, oh, well, if Hausman can't help you, I can't help you. So I guess we're out of luck. Which is insane, right? Because you read that and you just naturally assume all these figures are used about all the controls they did, all the research they did. But it's like, where is this? It's not publicly accessible. In fact, even the authors don't have access to the work anymore. So are we just gonna, I don't know, take it for granted that this work was perfectly controlled? I mean, are you kidding me? And this data was talked about, in The Atlantic, it was talked about in Freakonomics, it was talked about in Adam Grant's book. Never was any actual paper produced. I mean, never was the result, only the results were trotted out. None of the data was actually ever visible. I don't know, maybe I'm being a little too critical. I truly do believe that people like Grant and these writers are the best in pop science. The reason I say that is because they have the most references of probably anybody. I mean, if you take like your average, this is sort of part of the reason I didn't talk about YouTubers too much, is because YouTubers are sort of second tier in pop science, generally, broadly speaking. Because you take your average YouTuber, what are we gonna make? Maybe a 10-minute video, maybe a 20-minute video. A book is several times that length. You just get way more time to talk about ideas. People spend way more time writing about those ideas, and people spend way more time researching about those ideas. I mean, even, my last video, I have a ton of references in it, but maybe the references would span a page. To give you some context, Grant, he had 30 pages of references in originals. Like, I think a tenth of his book was references. So just to put YouTube in context, YouTube is like well below pop sci books. And so that's why we really didn't talk about it, but it's worth saying that, like, yeah, if you think your YouTubers like myself are somehow better than these writers, you couldn't be more wrong. The last thing I want to discuss is the idea that I heard from somebody who studies this stuff for a living, methodological problems in science. What he told me is that it's not so much that these writers are doing these things intentionally, right? They're not doing these things maliciously. He was telling me that basically it's just the problem of everyone has a job to do, and everyone has incentives within those jobs, which we've sort of discussed. But consider that when you're a scientist, right, and you're trying to move up in the ranks, what moves you up is publishing. And the thing about publishing is journals like it, especially the better journals like it if you have some sensational results. So you have this like little incentive to sort of fudge the data here, maybe not intentionally do it, but maybe even look for the more exciting data. So you do that as a scientist. Then the science editor of your university, he comes to you and he says, hey, what do you have for me? You tell him about your new exciting article, and he has to frame that in a way that the wider world will care about, and maybe a HuffPo will pick up, or the Atlantic will pick up. So he maybe he massages the wording a little bit to make your finding a little more sensational than it is. Then, once the science editor's done, then it goes on to maybe either an article, or it goes on to like a pop science writer, where the same thing is repeated. People maybe forget about this nuance, forget about like that little caveat there, and focus on like the main claim of the thing, and try to make this sensational thing out of it. And it keeps just filtering. Filter. Meanwhile, the data is usually not being gone back and checked on, because people just naturally assume, oh, the person who did it knew what they were doing. And at the end, what you have is just this long game of telephone where everybody is sort of manipulating the story, leaving things out here, emphasizing these things in order to play into what they're trying to say or what their job's demanding of them. And that just produces a lot of simplified answers, and sometimes misleading answers. Not always, because obviously there are better and worse actors in all of this. There are people who are aware of all these incentives and try to fight them. That's not my point. My point is just these incentives are there, and because they're there, these things do slip through. So, what do we do about this? Unfortunately, I think a lot of this is inevitable, right? The people who are qualified on it, the experts, generally are either bad communicators, or they spend so much time explaining all the nuance that people aren't interested in. And on the other hand, the people who are good at communicating tend not to be experts in all the fields that they are talking about. So you just always are going to have this sort of disconnect, and as the viewer, you just have to be informed that this is a thing that happens, and you have to be skeptical when people make claims. Anyway, I don't want to go too long on this. I just wanted to get some other ideas out there and just say, by no means was the last video's examples like the only thing in pop science. There are actually too many examples to count, but I just wanted to give you a few more to get your hands on, give you a few more ideas to think about, and thanks for listening to my pop sci leftovers, and I hope to see you in the next video. Subscribe to the other channel. I'll see you guys soon.